My research question is how media frame memories about Joseph Stalin in Russia. When we talk about memory and media, we have choice. What we explain through what phenomenon we explain through another one. So my initial position is that any type of information that gets into the field of media works according to the rules of media production. So I analyze the material based on the institutional role of media when we speak about memory as well. There are two tendencies in this regard that I wanted to mention. So the first one is who owns the right to memory, which considers institutional dimension of media saturation of memory. And the second one is that media is focused on popular personalities and not on masses, which makes a relationship between so-called collective memory and media more complicated. So in general, I should also state that this kind of interconnection and inter-influence is quite complicated, but as I stated before, I just chose the institutional dimension of media to talk about that. To overcome this focus on elites in media, on some popular personalities, I decided to take a look at the opinion of masses represented in media. Luckily, there is a poll conducted by Levada Center, one of the leading polling companies in Russia, that conducts a survey that studies attitudes of Russians towards the personality of Stalin and his politics and this whole epoch. The survey is usually widely represented in Russian media. It's quite a influential news event and a news trigger, so it provides a lot of material to analyze. I will not focus on the poll itself, as it was widely criticized by Russian sociologists, and there are many questions to the poll itself. I'm interested only in framing of memories about Stalin in this regard, because as I said before, Russian media react on this poll, and they usually write something about this when it happens. So my theoretical framework is based on the notion of frames, which is understood in the sense it introduced by Todd Gitlin in 80s. And it says that frames are principles of selection, emphasis, and presentation composed of little tacit theories about what exists, what happens, and what matters. As you can see on the slide, there are several discussions about how broadly or how narrow we should understand the notion of frame. So I stick to the broader understanding of this key concept. If we talk about those polls, in 2019, the poll was conducted again. So it starts in early 2000s, and it repeats from time to time. So the last one was in 2019, and there were two initial sources with information about the poll. These first sources served for many purposes when we talk about memory about Stalin in the last 2 years represented in media, as it set the agenda. I mean, it set what we discuss when we talk about Stalin and his epoch. It also set the evaluation of the epoch and some cliches that were used in these first sources, because they contain not pure data, but interpretation as well. So you can see on the slide that the first framing source, the first source that presented the results of that poll was the Levada Center itself, the polling company itself, who conducted that poll. And On their website, one could see the results of their poll, but they were presented not only as a table with answers, but also they had a short analytical note before the numbers, before the answers and percentage after. So this analytical note had 7 storylines, short storylines that you can see on the slide. I should say that they are evaluative not in the same amount, not of the same amount as, for example, when we talk about the age or political preferences of those who treat Stalin and his epoch one way or another, then we mostly speak about numbers. But as for establishing a new social norm or the last storyline about supporting the idea of unjustified losses, it's much more interpretative by its nature. So when it's multiplied in other media platforms, then we see that they just repeat this framing created by the polling company itself. For a quick example, short example, I'd like to quote how the 7th storyline was described on the platform of the polling company. So it said that support for the opinion that the human victims of the Soviet people in the Stalin era are unjustified, in fact, about the recognition of crimes is gradually decreasing. So this note, in fact, about the recognition of crimes says more about attitude of the polling company than about attitude of Russians, but still it will be replicated in many other media platforms. The second framing source that also served as the initial source for other media platforms was a publication on RBK, was a media article on RBK. RBK is a popular non-state media platform. Almost at the same time as Levada Center, there were difference in minutes. So it means that if we look at the relationship between the media platform and the polling company, we obviously see that the practices that stand behind it, we can say for sure that there is an agreement between them and the polling company gives the results to this media platform before it publishes it on its website. So almost at the same time, on the same day, we see a quite detailed media article on RBK, which described all the 7 storylines as we see on the website of the polling company. But there were several differences still. The results, this analytical note that is given just as the truth itself on the website of the polling company is delivered as a comment of an expert, employee of the Levada Center, on the website of this media platform. So it's less manipulative, as it lets to divide the results of the polls and the interpretation, because we can see that it is a comment of an expert and it's analytical and it's not about numbers, but it's also about some evaluation of the numbers. The second difference is that storyline number 6 was expanded by the information about how many young people know historical details about the epoch. The connection between these two storylines, between the additional information and the initial storyline, is not clear. They just add it there, put it there, and we make the connection. The audience makes the connection by itself. And the third big difference is that storyline number 7 is given as a separate story with additional comments of another expert, which is now not employee of the Levada Center, but external to the polling company. And this seventh storyline presents quite an interesting phenomenon, that the results of the poll are connected not to the past, not to the Stalin itself, not to the epoch itself, but to the present, and to the current political situation. So you can see the comments of the expert on the slide, but what's disputative about that storyline is that who is understood as victims. So first they speak only about victims of political repressions, but later they still discuss the victims during the Second World War, as they also appeared in the same period. But these victims were not discussed that widely as the victims of political repressions. Let's take a look at the second round of framing. Saying second round of framing, I mean those media platforms that reacted to the publication of the Levada Center or to the publication of RBK, which I analyzed just before. So these are free media platforms that got a lot of attention of the audience, that published a text as a reaction to that news information. So what we see here is that they do not dwell upon each storyline. For example, the first one, Medusa, describes only the first and the seventh storylines, but the way they speak about it is that they do not add anything to those numbers. They just show peaking indices, which is also quite framing, but what's important here, if we speak about memory, that they do not add any additional storylines, any additional events, or something like this. If we take a look on the second media platform, it also covers the fifth storyline as well as the first and seventh. And what's important that they do is that they describe Stalinist and anti-Stalinist meetings that happened in March 2019 that show not only the results of the poll, but also show some events that happened around us, that happened in Moscow. So when they describe these meetings, they also mentioned those who suffered from political repressions as anti-Stalinist activists. So they describe this dichotomy in the attitude of Russians towards this figure. The third media platform, which is actually an informational agency, stops only on the first storyline, and later they try to reframe the attitude to Stalin from an evil to a positive leader. How do they do it? So their first step is that they add a short note about making the USSR a great country, as it was under very difficult circumstances. It had a lot of problems. So Stalin was the person who made the country great, not only from political, but also from economical point of view and so on. And then the second step that they take is that they describe a lot of initiatives to build monuments to Stalin initiated by the Communist Party, which ignores the initial information about the correlation of political parties supported by Russians and their attitude to Stalin. So it's not that only communists support the figure of Stalin, other people also do. But still, here in this note, we see that describing only the first storyline, they can manipulate with other storylines or just ignore them and create the sequence that they need. So here is the positive framing of Stalin, the only one absolutely positive framing that I found. So it's very interesting how they managed to do it. The second set of second round of framing sources are those media platforms that reacted to Levada Center, not to RBK. So what do they add? Novaya Gazeta adds data about those who are nostalgic about the USSR, which makes the context even broader, because in that context, attitude to Stalin shows more like attitude to the whole USSR, to the whole period of time, not only Stalin's epoch, but the context is blurred and expanded. TASS, which is also an informational agency, also is also focused only on the first storyline, but not like RIA Novosti. They also try to reframe it and to emphasize something else, for which they use comments from the Kremlin, which are the news event. So the news event is the comment from an expert from Kremlin and not the poll itself. And the third example here is quite neutral, as Interfax, another informational agency, is focused only on formulations of Levada Center. It delivers only numbers, no additional comment, no additional cases or any other storylines. But still we see that the initial source is influencing, because even if they try to be neutral, they still replicate cliches and evaluations of the polling company. I also mentioned that there were phrasal cliches that were replicated. So the two most bright cliches were trust and repression. So the first storyline was labeled as trust by RBK. So they combined different positive or even neutral reactions into one and called it trust to Stalin, and it was used in the headline of many other media platforms. So many people who didn't read the initial set of numbers knew only about trust to Stalin and not more definitive attitudes to this figure. So the second cliche is repression. So the seventh storyline is cut to just political oppression of the epoch, and it cuts the victims of the Second World War because it's focused on political repression. So the first cliche expands, it blurs the context, making it larger. The second cliche blurs the context, making it less, smaller. What do we learn about memory here? So memory about Stalin is split between two major frames. Stalin is a leader who won the Second World War and who brought the USSR to economic prosperity, versus Stalin as an evil, guilty of political repressions and the whole Soviet past. The second thing is that this memory is connected to several other topics, such as nostalgia for the USSR, because we see that media platforms connect these two things. It's also connected to knowledge about Stalinist epoch and the past in general, as we saw RBK did, because they also added some information about the knowledge of the young people about historical past of the country. So now it is connected. The third thing is that there are pro and anti-Stalinist meetings these days, which means that when we speak about those polls, it's not only about a poll, it's also about some actions that people really take. They go outside and they do something. So it means that the topicality of the discussion about the polls is quite high. And one more thing here is that there are several initiatives to build new monuments to Joseph Stalin. What we also find out that the attitude to this historical personality and this epoch is framed as the mirror to the relationship between the people and the government. It's a reflection of the current political situation, not the past itself. And as the last slide, I wanted to show the references to the texts that I analyzed. Thank you for your attention.